Good morning, everyone. This is Mitchie, and welcome back to the Manic Manor podcast. Today's episode, we are going to talk about Melvin Quinney, who, at the height of the Satanic Panic cases, ended up with a conviction that would traumatize him for 30 plus years. So in the 1980s and 1990s, the entire country was filled with hysteria that anything deemed out of the ordinary was satanic and a threat to the very American way of life. And it was so widespread that neighbors began pointing fingers at each other. If you had tattoos, or if you painted your nails black, that was enough reason for some people to accuse you of worshiping Satan and being in a cult. Sometimes it was the most ordinary-looking men and women that would even be accused. Now, Melvin Quinney was one of these people who were accused of being involved in satanic practices. Now, it was Texas in 1990, and Melvin Quinney was going through a divorce with his wife, Deborah. During this divorce, his soon-to-be ex-wife and his son eventually came forth, contacting local authorities with claims that Melvin was the leader of a cult. And in this cult, the wife claimed that Melvin, along with other members, committed a series of brutal murders as part of satanic rituals. Melvin's son also accused him of being part of the satanic cult, and that he had sexually abused him and his sister both. This ended up with Melvin being convicted of indecency with a child and sentenced to 20 years in prison. Now, despite having the Satanic Panic accusations going on, they didn't hold up as much as the sex abuse. Now, Melvin, when he got out of prison in 1999, had to be registered as a sex offender, and he had absolutely no contact with his children. Now, he was afraid to reach out to them, scared of what may happen if he did. Because of his sex offender registration, Melvin was limited on where he could be and who he could be around, resulting in him living in a very small apartment in the outskirts of San Antonio, Texas. The apartment was run down at best to describe it, with the floors rotting in on him. Now, when 2012 rolled around, things started to look up for Melvin. Melvin ended up posting on Facebook a photo, and in the caption with the photo, he asked if his children would reach out to him. This would be the turning point for Melvin. Soon enough, his youngest son Matthew reached out to him and got in touch, and this opened up the door for Melvin to come back into his children's lives. We have now come out to find that Deborah, along with a lot of therapists during the time, had pressured the then 9-year-old John, who was the son in question that had accused him, to testify that his father had been a cult member and molested him and his sister. They had also pressured and coerced the young boy into believing that he had seen murders take place at the hands of his father by this group. Now, initially John had claimed no memory of abuse from his dad, and then things changed when he initially said the molestation claims were on his mother against his sister Sarah. Now, it shifted from his mother to his father after therapists that had supposedly specialized in satanic abuse theories interviewed him. It stated now that these theorists and their ways were highly inappropriate and extremely outdated. It was during a time where tons of people truly believed that there were people doing horrific things under the guise of Satanism. Children were coerced and guided by people they thought were professionals to make outrageous and false statements. We saw that before in the McMartin preschool trial. And as children, they just wanted to be told that they were doing the right thing and what they were doing was good. Now, eventually, John came to believe that he was part of this so-called satanic cult that his father was in, and by guidance of the adults around him, he was told he was abused until eventually he believed it. John recalled saying he would tell them that he had doubts about what happened, only for the professionals and the therapist to claim it was because he was suffering with multiple personalities, and that his father had quote-unquote programmed him to think that way, just to think anything and to question it. Now, Deborah passed in 1999, the same time that Melvin was released from prison and forced to register. Now, Melvin held on to a lot of guilt and shame. He was ashamed he didn't realize what was going on. His son also felt ashamed that he didn't realize sooner what had happened. However, it's not his fault. He was labeled as a little hero for stepping out against the quote-unquote bad guys. It also became clear that his mother was suffering from mental illness, once again like the case we saw with the McMartin preschool trial. The initial complainant suffered from schizophrenia and alcoholism in that one, just as this mother is suffering from mental illness as well. John said that his mother was clearly ill mentally and didn't get the help that she truly needed. She was instead persuaded by people with superstitions and kept even more mentally unstable. He now became Melvin's biggest advocate, recanting his prior confession and calling for his father's innocence. Now, at this point, remember, Melvin is still a convicted felon. He still had to register as a sex offender and all that. Now, John had met with other survivors of the Satanic Panic cases who showed him that he wasn't alone in this, but he still couldn't shake the guilt that he felt for what happened to his father. So it became his mission to exonerate his father, and of course his siblings agreed and followed suit with him. Melvin himself was a bit skeptical. He appreciated that his children wanted to help him, that they wanted to make things right after so long. However, with what happened, he lacked a lot of faith in the judicial system. He didn't believe he had had a fair trial at all, and then he had lost contact with his children for 23 years. He was stuck with years of prison and parole, and was horrified that he would have to go through another trial and endure a lot of pain. And in the same breath, Melvin tried his best to reassure his son John that he had nothing to feel guilty about. But he knew that the guilt in John wouldn't go away, that fears had to be set aside. So in the fall of 2020, John finally began to look for attorneys to help him with his father. After a month, there was a San Antonio lawyer who reached out, but demanded $20,000 to $30,000 up front, and that wasn't easy money for the family. It's not easy money for anybody, especially nowadays, especially in 2020. Now, his daughter Sarah came up with an idea to reach out to the Innocence Project of Texas. They take cases for free. It was an organization set on freeing wrongly convicted individuals. And by a miracle, out of all the letters that the organization gets, they did decide to take up Melvin's case. Now we're looking into Mike Ware, who had reached out to them within a day and admired Melvin and his family for pursuing justice and the truth. They reviewed the case, felt it to be very strong. He chatted with John for over an hour and agreed that they would take on the case. It was a shining beacon in the night. The Innocent Project began working in December of 2020, finding witnesses, preparing affidavits, hunting down the case through and through. They were determined to get a hearing. They had to convince a judge and a jury that a jury would never have convicted Melvin with the evidence that they had. Now, it took a year, but they finally got a hearing date. John would be the key to the entire hearing. His recantation that initially put his father behind bars would be the saving grace. It would be in the same court with the same news media, and this time, Melvin finally had his children by his side. It was clear going into this hearing that the first attorney for Melvin was completely ill-prepared for the initial hearings back in the 80s and the 90s. Now, the new attorneys on this project were much more prepared. They were very much so better. Some of the witnesses for Melvin's new hearing were therapists who said they saw these false allegations before in the past and deemed John to be a credible source because he's coming forward voluntarily to help his father now. One even mentioned it was a heavy burden for him to carry. And there were many psychologists who were involved in the witness testimony that poked holes in that initial prosecution. They pointed out there were clear signs of coercion that was ignored initially. They brought up also that it wasn't John's initial statement to come forward with the confession. They also brought up that there was a lack of satanic influence when they did a search, and not to mention that it was never brought up in the trial, and the religious and mental standing of Deborah as well. Now, a best friend of Melvin finally brought up as a character witness, which was something that the initial attorney did not think to do before. Even Melvin's children took the stand to talk about how they had immense pressure on them back then. Now, the daughter Sarah recalled being in foster care and constantly being medicated at just 5 years old, something she mentioned during this testimony now. What is also ironic is that when John was called up to testify, he was the same age Melvin was during the initial conviction. John took that stand for 2 hours, going over everything in his life and being questioned. It all circled around him being coerced by these former professionals, and that they instilled doubt in his mind as a young child. John admitted to feeling guilty, and how he didn't initially want to believe it, and he didn't want to say it, but he came to learning what happened wasn't right. It was rough for everyone, especially for his family. Melvin just sat there the entire time smiling at him, proud that his son finally had the courage after all of these years to speak up the truth of what had happened. Now, that took 7 hours in a courtroom, and in April of 2023, they finally got their wish. The court believed them, and with a short signature of a pen, a judge dismissed the case for the now 74-year-old Melvin Quinney, exonerating him and making him innocent. He was finally a free man after 32 years. Melvin finally had gotten his life back, he got his kids back, and he got his name back. And really, all Melvin wants now is to be able to move closer to his children and see his grandchildren grow up. He also wants to have a piano to play without fear of making a sound to disturb others, which sounds to me like he was a complete prince of a guy, especially with what he had went through. Now that is the story of Melvin Quinney. I hope you all enjoyed the story. I hope you all enjoyed this episode. If you have anything you would like to add on, please feel free to. You can reach out at manicmanorpodcast@gmail.com. You can also reach out on Facebook and Instagram at Manic Manor Podcast, or just comment below on our YouTube, Manic Manor Podcast. And if you feel so inclined, we do have a Patreon set up. That's patreon.com/Manic Manor Podcast. So I hope you all will have a wonderful week. Hope you all who are in the United States had a good 4th despite everything going on. And as always, I will see you in the next episode.